trauma-informed school in Nashville, Tennessee.
See, Meg, I told you. It's great in theory, wasn't it?
It was. It was a super cool.
But why did it start in the middle? Anyways. All right. Well, here we go. Welcome to the podcast, and I'll add it all in. Don't worry about it. So, welcome, and thank you for joining the podcast. As you know, this is the Trauma Informed Educators Network podcast, and I am Matthew Portell, and you haven't seen me or heard from me in like 2 months. And I must say, I'm sorry that I left and I didn't come back for a while. I had a lot going on over the last couple months, as you all know, if you listen to the podcast. And if you were there, I got the amazing experience of going and doing a 4-city speaking tour in New Zealand in September. And then, which was amazing. And I will tell you, I have to have a huge shout out to my Christchurch, New Zealand folks. We had way too much fun in that event. I had them doing their best American accents, which was amazing, by asking them questions and having them respond. But nonetheless, amazing work happening across the whole country of New Zealand. And then I got to visit and speak in Australia, in Brisbane, at the Trauma Aware Conference with the previous guest from this podcast, Dr. Lori Desautel. So we got an amazing opportunity to speak there to a large conference, and then the next day to the Department of Education and a bunch of school administrators. So there was that, and then I've been in West Virginia twice. I've been all over the place. So unfortunately, I had to cancel a lot of podcasts, but I didn't cancel this podcast, which is episode number 70. And this podcast is with Meg, and I have known Meg for a couple years because she has shared her brilliance and talents at the Trauma Informed Educators Network conference, which I appreciated. But she is the Bal-A-Vis-X practitioner and trainer, and an educator with 22 years of experience in both general and special education. She currently facilitates the Reset and Return Room at an urban elementary school in Wichita, Kansas. She also supports teachers in both trauma-informed and restorative practices as the equity champion in her building. She leads her building in looking at their practices through a lens of equity, inclusion, and belonging. In her private Bal-A-Vis-X studio, she teaches the exercises to both children and adults in a varying degrees of both social and cognitive levels. So, Meg, welcome to the podcast. How are you? And tell us the Meg story.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me. I'm well. Kansas was nice and warm and sunny today, and 80 degrees. So the sun was out, and that was good. Yeah, the Meg story. I've been an educator a long time. I'm in the point in my career where some of my colleagues could be my children. So I started out my career in Garden City, Kansas, at a 5-6 center where I taught reading a very, very long time ago. And then my husband and I moved back to Central Kansas so we could be back with our families. And we have 2 amazing children. Jenna is a senior at Emporia State University, plans to be an athletic trainer, and Callan is a sophomore at Hutchinson Community College. So they're doing really, really well. I've been with Wichita Public Schools 18 years now. So I have a variety of experiences with them. I started out as a general education teacher. My favorites were 4th and 5th grade. Those intermediate kids hold a special place in my heart. And then life kind of threw us a curveball when Callan was born. He has high functioning autism and ADHD, and that, as a mom of a kid with a disability, really changed my lens. And so I had 1 master's degree in instructional design and technology, and folks ask me why I have 2, and I often say because I didn't do it right the first time. So I went back and got my special ed degree, and I've been in some form of special education ever since, until about 5 years ago when I took this job as what has morphed into a position that I facilitate a reset and return space for our kids so they can come down and they can get themselves regulated so that they can do the best learning possible. And along the lines, somewhere along the way, I decided that restorative practices was the way to go after uh, attending a conference between Dr. Perry and Stuart Ablon. They presented together, and I was able to see how those two things really, really jive together. So that is also under my umbrella, is that I facilitate restorative practices circles and harm repair within my building between students and staff.
I can feel like envy coming through the interwebs towards you, because it's like I guarantee there's educators like, how do you get a job in a role like that, right?
You
And
make it.
that you took it right out of my mind. That is exactly right, right? You can't wait until someone else has done
No.
something. Sometimes you've got to jump in and figure it out and do it, right? And I love
Yes.
that you have these many hats and serving in these roles, because one day, Meg, you and I will look back on this podcast and say, do you remember when we talked and that like wasn't normal in schools? Now
Right.
every school has that position in their school. So tell us about, I'm just, I got your box of supplies shipped to my house before the Trauma Informed Educators Network conference. And I thought, I don't know what this is, but it's going to be awesome. So tell us about the Bal-A-Vis-X and how it came about, what it is, what you do.
Sure.
Yeah, just tell us about it.
Sure. So, Bal-A-Vis-X was created by an educator. His name is Bill Hubert, and he still lives in Wichita. And he was a first grade teacher for many, many years. And before that, his background was in martial arts, and he was also a taught English at the university level. And he and his wife landed back in Wichita, which is where her family lives. And he taught first grade, and the children were changing. The children that were coming to him were changing, and their needs were changing. And he decided that if he could not figure out how to help these kids, then he had to find a new profession. And through his lens of martial arts, he was able to view kids in their physicalness. How do they walk? How do they jump? How do they swing on the swings? And what he came after years of watching and looking and noticing, he noticed that there were three sets of kids in his classroom. There were the kids who he describes as kids who are going to learn despite their teachers. They're just going to absorb it and they're going to learn. And then there's another group of kids that with a little extra time and a little extra practice and a little extra love, they usually kick in about Christmas or spring break. And then there was a group of first graders that no matter how much extra time or extra love you gave them, their academics just never kicked in. And he noticed over the years that those were often the kids who couldn't jump, who couldn't climb stairs one foot after another. They couldn't swing. They couldn't walk on a balance beam. And that's when he decided he had to figure out what to do. And he's just started exploring different kinds of movement. And Bal-A-Vis-X is the product of his lens of viewing movement and learning through the lens of martial arts. And that started about 30 years ago. And then I found the program when my son, Callan, was he was a third grader. And third grade was really, 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 really hard for him. And he became an I can't kid. And so I was lucky enough to live within driving distance of Bill, and we started private sessions there. And the biggest thing that came out of Callan is we turned him from an I can't kid into an I can kid. One of the beauty of Bal-A-Vis-X is that it's rhythm, it's repetitive, it's patterned movement, but it's all based on physical technique. It is not based on luck. It is not based on whether you can keep a beat on your own. It is all based on physical technique, so anyone can learn.
Wow, that is remarkable. As a father of a child who is in martial arts from the age of 5 until 10, and when he received his black belt in Wataru karate, I had all of those thoughts of this has got to be helpful for him, not just the discipline of it, not just the goal setting of it, but the physicality of it. And I think you might have met him, Mr. Nathan Hunter,
Yes.
at the
Yes.
Trauma Informed Educators Network conference. He was my son's karate instructor, and he is now in his first year of teaching. And we've talked a lot about how that physicality helps kids, especially the kids who are having the hardest time,
Mhm.
right? So I
Mhm.
had no idea that was the history of this amazing organization and process, but it makes really good sense. So tell me about your full time. That's your side gig. Tell me about your main gig, because I know that listeners are going to want to hear more about your role, because it's such a powerful one that every school needs.
Sure. I kind of feel like I have to go through from the beginning, because there were a lot of growing pains getting to where we
Mhm.
are. Like, we did
Mhm.
not just morph into this with, butterflies and rainbows and unicorns.
Absolutely.
So it originally started out several years ago when the state of Kansas through with a redesign program. And the point of redesign was for individual school buildings to be able to really analyze the kids and the families who walk in their doors every single day, and how can we best meet their needs. And so our building decided to use the principles of the neurosequential model in education, and use those ideas and those pillars of learning. And so my principal originally funded my position by reallocating a classroom position, which we had lost some enrollment, and he convinced them to let him keep that allocation. So for several years, my contract read third grade teacher.
I love your principal. I don't know who he is or
Yep.
she is, but I love the only thing I would have done differently is I wouldn't have asked. I would have just done it, and then
Yeah.
hopefully they wouldn't have figured it out. But good on them, because that's how innovation occurs, right? Keep going,
Right.
keep going.
Okay, so then the first year, in fact, there were two certified staff and a para, and we were doing this job, and we were literally like building the airplane like while we were flying it. And so it originally started as we had about 50 kids that we had identified as becoming dysregulated throughout the day. So what we tried to do is to collect data and find out what are those stressful times, what is causing those stress responses, and we tried to get ahead of it. So we provided 50 breaks a day, 50 kids a day. They would come in for a scheduled break. We were building those relationships. We were, kind of piecemealing, working on social emotional skills as we went, and that went really, really well. And at the end of the year, we were really, really tired, but it went really well, and we had a lot of kids make some progress. And then over the next couple of years, we kind of slowly lost that other allocation, and then came down to just myself and a paraprofessional. And as we lost that allocation, we had more and more dysregulated kids walking through our doors. And so I think we did a good job of keeping um, the principles of the neurosequential model in education up front. And so we talk a lot about regulating and relating and reasoning. We take as much of that to our staff as we can. We find we just keep putting the content in front of them, and that helps. So it's morphed into now. I still see kids every single day. We provide some scheduled breaks and try to get ahead of that. um, we're doing our best to reach our K through 2 kids, which are we're now starting to see those signs of COVID, from COVID isolation and those kinds of things come through. um, my principal has now allowed me, I get to spend a little more time working on curriculum, and I have a social emotional picture book library that I curate, and so those are all available to our teachers for checkout. And then I'm able to just get them kind of like bite-sized PD throughout the week, either by email or by quickly meeting in team meetings, just to keep those ideas of social emotional learning like right in front of them. um, supporting them in community circles. We have a community circle time every morning in every classroom. So supporting those, whether those might be, preloading curriculum ideas, or solving problems, or resolving conflict, just helping teachers navigate those things too.
This sounds really familiar. You know why? Because this is the very similar journey we went through. I mean, I think that's how it starts, right? You know, you got to do it differently. You just got to problem solve it, right? And learn and go, that didn't work.
Yep.
I can tell you, we used, when we first started, we had, what was it called? I don't remember what we called it, but it was like where kids went when they got in trouble. And we thought it
Oh,
was a good
like
idea,
an
right?
ISS room or something.
Yeah, but we
Yep.
called it something else. I think it was like Advocacy Center or something.
Oh,
I don't
okay. Yeah.
remember what it was, but kids could go there to de-escalate and everything. But we realized, like, this ain't it. Like, this is not it. So I love that you're like going, okay, this is great. Okay, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. What do you see? Like, what do you see the big picture? What do you see in the next 3 to 5 years? If you could paint the ideal picture for this role, what would it be? Because, you know, I keep preaching that we have to get our adults to completely understand this.
Yes.
Because our kids, I know you agree, kids can't learn self-regulation until they experience co-regulation over and over and over and over and over again, while we're also teaching them those skills of self-regulation. So what do you think it's going to look like if you had the ideal wand?
Right. If I had the ideal wand, I would definitely, number one is to build teacher efficacy so that they don't need me. Um, that's number one, is efficacy and confidence, and building confidence so that they stay, like, so that the folks in my building stay long term. We've had some turnover, and that's not easy. And we have bright new faces who show up every year, and they're wonderful. And new teachers are sometimes hard work, though. There's a lot of time and energy that go into building those people, and that's really one of my favorite things to do. I wish I had more time to do that. I wish I had more time to be boots on the ground, with those new teachers and supporting them in real time, like, and actually being there maybe when a crisis is going to occur, about to occur, and like doing in time, real time coaching. I wish I had more time to do that. So that would be, if wishes were fishes, I would have more time to do some coaching.
Yeah, and I mean, that is ideal for any position, right? Even as a principal, I would be like, if I could just get time to support. And you're right. I think that, you know, even at the school that I led, we thought really long and hard about hiring brand new teachers, and we did. Right, we did, and most of them were student teachers or interns in our school, so we already prepped them for a year. Because it's not that they're not brilliant.
No, they are.
It's
and
that
energy. They have so much energy.
What I've said is, but sometimes you need a Green Beret and not a private. Right? You need some background. But we had some amazing brand new teachers come in and shine, right? And it's because they had the mindset.
Yes.
And when we went through the interview process, every candidate got a letter and explained what we did and why we did it. And when we interviewed for mindset. You know, what do you think about punishment versus consequence? What is your understanding of restorative processes, right? And so I hear what you say, and I feel that deeply. But I also believe, as a new teacher, right, a principal gave me a shot. And,
absolutely.
And it was an amazing experience to get that shot. So I'm thinking about, you kind of talked about the process that happened. And I just want to challenge listeners to think about what Meg said about, listen, there was this opportunity, there was an extra position, and implementing that, because at Fall Hamilton, we received an innovation grant from the state of Tennessee. That's how we started. We hired a position. We called it the trauma-informed practitioner. Turned out we just needed a social worker, which is who is currently working there now, and does a lot of the same things. So tell me a little bit more. Tell me, how did you kind of told us about the Bal-A-Vis-X, but how did you get into this work? You talked about your son, but where did the trauma informed lens come into the work? How did you get to the point where like, hey, I want to have this space. I want to have a de-escalation space. I want to do restorative. How did that all come about?
hmm So that work started many years ago when I was teaching at a health and wellness magnet in Wichita. I was teaching fifth grade, and the students coming through my door were changing, and I needed to change what I did. And I happened to have a dear friend who was a pediatric psychiatrist, and the first book she shared with me was Dr. Perry's Born for Love book. And when I read that book and I learned how we are hardwired to connect and how we need to be building those relationships with those kids and with our colleagues, and that those need to come first, that's where it all started. And it just snowballed from there. Um, that it went on into Dr. Perry's work. That's kind of where my roots are. And then I started to explore, okay, so this is the science. What does that look like in a school? And how do we implement that in a school? And when I first started, it was just me, myself, and I implementing in my very own fifth grade classroom, because I knew something had to change, because I couldn't go on teaching the way I was. I knew that my focus had to be different.
And I want educators to hear that, because I get this all the time. Without a principal, I can't do this. Without administrator, I can't do this. I say this all the time. Nobody can mandate you to love kids or to not love kids, and to treat them with respect and to show up and hold space for them. Nobody can tell you you can't do that. Right. And sometimes that's what the start looks like, is just shifting our own paradigm and our lens on how we interact and operate with kids. What year was that? How long ago did that paradigm shift happen for you?
Oh goodness. Let's see. I'm gonna have to do a little math in my head. So that would have been about 2008 or 9.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, a long time ago. And I absolutely I didn't talk to anybody about it. I didn't bounce any ideas off of it. I just did it. I figured it out within my classroom.
Wow. I mean, that's powerful. And that's what it
Mhm.
is. This is activation, right? You learn it, you do it. That's exactly what we did. I did as a principal. I knew that if I didn't do it differently, I was committing malpractice. And I openly say that all the time.
Mhm.
That because I knew the science now, if I didn't change, then that was on me.
Right.
And I knew I was negatively impacting kids, where my intent originally was never to hurt children. I've never met an adult that said that. I've suspected that there are a few out there that maybe that's internally their intent. They don't necessarily know it. But my outcome wasn't measuring my intent, which was to ensure kids meet their fullest potential and they can see their own potential, right? And then when I was
Right.
like, oh my goodness, like what I'm doing to kids is actually the opposite of that. I knew that something had to give and change.
Mhm. And one of the biggest shifts I think that for us in the past like 5 years at my current school was when folks started to realize that children really do not learn if they're not in a regulated state. And once I could tie those two things together, then we started to get people on board and started to move forward, because the narrative that is preached to educators all the time is academics first. I mean, that's the narrative that we've had for as long as I've been an educator, is that we're here to teach them and we're here to make academic progress. And once we got that point across, and some of the teachers could then realize, hey, well, you know what, it might be the fact that they're dysregulated, not necessarily this phonics program is failing. That provided them a new lens to look through, and I think it helped them, some of them, not to feel quite so hopeless. Like there was another avenue we could use to get the academic process progress that we needed, but we had to get them regulated and ready to learn, and make them feel loved and feel safe. And that gave my teachers an action step to do, where before, I think they were kind of feeling, like, what's next? Like, we don't know. We've done everything. We've done all the scripted programs. What are we going to do next? We don't know.
So powerful. And I hope one day, Meg, that systems instructors will realize that kids can't learn in rooms where the adults are also dysregulated.
Exactly.
Right. And that it's not just about the kids. It's about how our teachers continue to be loaded with so much stuff that it's not doable, right? It's incomprehensible. And then we have dysregulated adults in front of regulated kids that become dysregulated kids because we have dysregulated adults. And it's this perpetual cycle of why aren't kids achieving, right? I mean, it's more than just we need a better curriculum. We need more rigorous standards. We need more time. We have to have these conversations around how our adults are doing, and you've heard me say this before. If I hear self-care one more time, I swear I'm going to flip this computer over.
No, thank you.
Because this isn't about self-care. This is about collective care. This is about collective impact. This is about collective change, where we have to look at what is not working and we've got to figure out a way to do it differently, right? So that was just a little rant, and I could go on for that for like 4 hours. But let's get to the restorative practices, because I get this all the time, and I'm sure you do. How do restorative practices work in an elementary school, right? How do they work in an elementary school? I can understand it in a high school, but what about an elementary school? So tell us about your role in that restorative process, what it looks like, and your experience of how it works in elementary school.
Sure. Well, the first thing I always tell people is don't count out the little people, because they have great insight and they're often very, very honest little folks. So what it looks like for us is we stick to we start with the 3 questions: what happened, who was affected, and then what do we need to do to make it right. So restorative practices, especially like the interview part, like what happened and who was affected and what do you need to do to make it right, that's a lot of social emotional learning that goes off. You have to have a lot of insight. And one thing that I've been able to do is to create visuals for my kids. I have a visual for everything. I have feelings and emotions, and I have visuals of like different pictures of where these things may have taken place, and so they can see. And so if they don't have the language, they can show me what happened. That's the best way to describe what I do. Um, so we do that. We do have community circle time, which my teachers are doing really well with. They have morning community circle every morning. They start with a check-in, and then their circle can move in a couple of different ways. It might be that they're getting them ready for academics for the day. It might be that they're going over the schedules. It could be that they had an incident on the playground the day before and they need to problem solve that with their kids. So that's what that piece looks like. Now, when we get into harm repair with little people, that can be more I'm just going to say not really complicated, but there's more moving parts to that, because when we're small, we can, and our brains aren't fully developed, we get dysregulated really easy. And so sometimes it takes more than 1 or 2 or 3 goes to get our little ones to where they can realize what happened, take responsibility, and then do the hardest step, which is the make it right step.
That was my experience as well, right? And we asked the same question. What happened? What were you thinking at the time? What have you thought about since? Who was impacted? And how are you going to make it right? If I said that 100 times, I said it 1,000 times, right? And I think a piece that we also focused on was the other student on the other side.
Yes,
Maybe it was there was verbal aggression, there was physical aggression. We asked the same questions, right?
Right.
What happened?
Yes,
what have you thought about? How did it make you feel? How are they going to make it right? Because so often in schools, right, when kids have harm done, verbal harm, physical harm, emotional harm, whatever it is, that child, usually the parent is called if it's physical, and they come and pick the child up, or we send the child back to class and say, I'm so sorry that happened to you. We're going to take care of it. Right? We don't give kids voice. We don't give kids voice to explain what they were feeling, right? And I always said, don't ever let a kid say, it's okay, because we train our kids when an apology is given to say, it's okay. No, it's
No,
not
it's not.
okay that they
Nope.
put their hands on you. Say, it's not okay. Please don't ever do that again because it makes me feel really unsafe.
Right.
And so there's processes. And I know Joe Brummer is on here listening because he commented. And,
Hey, Joe.
we all love his book, Building a Trauma-Informed Restorative School, which I have
There it
right
is.
here. In his book, and I love that he has such an emphasis on that pre-work.
Yes.
You can't go through the restorative process if you haven't built the community on the front end, right? And you talked about that, those morning circles, those gatherings, those connectedness.
Mm-hmm.
That is easily as important. So how do you integrate that into your day? You mentioned it, but I would love to know more about what do those morning circles look like? How do those conversations occur in the classrooms?
Sure. Yeah. So we have morning community time building wide every morning. So the kids, they show up, they head directly to their classrooms. We don't have morning gym. We don't put everybody into the gym for breakfast. They head directly to their classrooms and they have breakfast in the classroom. So that helps us as far as like logistics and time. That gives us that time in the morning. And then we have 25 minutes for morning community. And so weekly, or well, I hope weekly, definitely every other week, the teachers from me, they get circle check-in questions. They get other ideas. Like we were having we needed to reteach our our common area expectations, and so I created a circle script around that, and our teachers use their morning community time then to address it that way. Sometimes we use my teachers use social emotional literature all the time. We really love Carmen's work from ESDAC and her resource with the scripts already written for circle books. That I have found to be super helpful using children's literature, because that is very, very safe for kids. Kids are used to being read to. Like that is a familiar part. And then if you can add the questions and the the process of the circle where everybody's voice is heard, it seems to we're not adding another new thing. We're taking something that they know how to do, and then we're adding a process that just enhances the social emotional learning from that piece of literature. So those are all ideas that we incorporate in the morning community. They can always come to me and say, "Hey Meg, I had this happen in my classroom, or I've got this issue. Can you help me write a circle script?" And of course, I always say yes. And we just create those scripts kind of one at a time as we have things that come up that need to be addressed. Like we have one coming up where we need to address some harm that was done within the neighborhood. It didn't happen on school campus, but it's still affecting our learning in the classroom. So that's going to be one thing that we're going to implement. We're going to pull that circle together next week, and the teachers have asked me to help. So that'll be one thing that I do next week.
That makes me think, before we really started the depth of this work, my first year as a principal, there was a drive-by shooting outside the side gate of our school. 4 people were shot. And we didn't even talk about it. And it makes me go, oh my goodness, if I would have known then what I know now, that would have been the first thing we do, is circle up, right? Mm-hmm. What do you know? What have you heard? What are you feeling? And it's so interesting because when I did step out of my role as a principal, Meg, I think you'll appreciate this. I did a circle with every class, and I let them ask me any question they wanted. And, the one primary question is, why are you leaving us? Which was really hard to answer. But I did explain it, and I explained what I did. But there's power in circle. And I love to say there's no magical thing about a circle other than everybody can see everyone else. Mm-hmm. Each individual can see every single person, which is why we set in circles, right? So that everybody is seen, heard, and validated. And so I hope that listeners understand when we talk about circles, that's what we're talking about. It's about that connectivity of everybody in the room feeling seen, validated, and heard in that space. Because if you sit anywhere else, you can't really see everybody. But in a circle, you can. And matter of fact, I know we had many faculty meetings in circles, many faculty meetings. And sometimes we had to move them to the gym because we had so many people who wouldn't fit in our little meeting room. But even as an adult, it's a powerful, powerful tool. So What do you see next for your work, for this work? What do you see it going?
Oh
Not
boy.
like you as a human, not as you as an individual, because we already talked about like
Oh,
your
sure.
vision, but like the work in general, trauma informed dad. What do you see it being? What do you see it coming in the future?
That's a hard question. Like, what do I, like, I have to sort out between, like, um, in the perfect world, like, what do I dream of? Like, what am I dreaming of? And what is
Yeah,
my
that's great.
curiosity?
And then we'll say
Uh,
realistically, what do you think?
right. And then we'll say realistically. I would hope that we can continue to establish how the trauma informed work and restorative practices really mesh together, and making sure that our restorative practice work is trauma informed, because that doesn't always occur. So making sure that those two things are really meshed together. I would hope that both of those practices would lead our school cultures to become cultures of safety, not only for students, but cultures of safety for the adults that are there. Because I think once that happens, like once all our adults can feel really, really safe, that's when we're going to experience everyone's gifts and everyone's creativity, and we're going to be able to tease out the things that really work for the students that walk in our door every day, because every staff member and every child in that building will be seen and heard and validated, and their ideas will be valued, and nobody will be scared to share, what they think might work. I think that's a place that we have to get to in education. Like, we have to get to the point where these incredibly wonderful, bright minds that we have, and we all have, like all of the staff in my building, we have years and years and years of experience, and we have fresh new ideas, and we just have to get our culture there so that everybody feels safe and validated to share and to be at their very best every single day. I think that's like, if we could get anywhere in the next 10 years of this work, that is where I really think that we will see the most impact on our students.
I don't have any like, I'm so used to Zoom. I wanted to do like the little clappy hands, but I'll just give you that because that's it. To me, that's the same. We have to, we've got to figure out what we can do with and next to the adults,
Yes.
and start handling and dealing with the toxicity that has been created and the systems that have been created for the adults, because it does not matter, right? I just said this last week while I was speaking in West Virginia. We want to talk about trauma as if it's something that only happens outside of the school. And I keep trying to reinforce there are many children who have never experienced trauma outside of school, but they have experienced extreme trauma inside of schools, right? There's children who experience trauma outside and inside. There's some that only experience inside and only experience outside. But we have to look at ourselves as adults, right? And think, what is it we're doing? I don't put that responsibility solely on the teacher. We have to step back and look at the system and say, what can we do to adjust so that we can support and build regulated adults in classrooms? And that
We
means doing some extreme things, maybe. I
we have
don't
a
know.
lot of things to undo in our
Oh,
systems.
yes.
Like, and that to me that's where I get overwhelmed, is thinking about how the systems that have created the cultures in our schools, that is not on the shoulders of the humans that work there. That is on the shoulders of the systems and the ideas and the beliefs that larger systems have decided that are important. And I sometimes struggle with that because I work for a really big school system.
Yeah.
So that's one of those things I have to work on, because that's where I can get overwhelmed. And so I just have to keep thinking, okay, one teacher at a time, one student at a time, one small group at a time, one circle at a time, one day.
And you know what? I agree with that. This isn't on our educators that are doing the work right now to figure out. And I'm going to be very honest and tell you, it's people like me who have just recently stepped into a different role, to start saying, okay, what can I do? Because I know what it's like to be in those spaces and places where dysregulation is commonplace because the pressure, the stress,
Mm-hmm.
just the way that it operates, right? So I'm glad, I'm really excited to tell you, Meg, that I get to speak the Department of Ed, the federal Department of Ed, not Secretary Cardona, but his number two, in about a week and a half with the the Campaign for Trauma Informed Policy and Practice. And for those of you who don't know about CTIP, Campaign for Trauma Informed Policy and Practice, please follow them, like them, join them, because it's not on the backs of our practitioners to do this advocacy and policy change, although it is. It's on us. It's on the people who are having these conversations, who are trying to get the decision makers to say, we've got to look at this, because it is not sustainable.
It is not.
Not
It is
sustainable.
not. What we are currently doing and the cultures of our schools and what we are asking classroom teachers to do, it is not sustainable for any period of time. And you can look at any of the statistics about the folks leaving the profession, and the data is out there to show you just that.
Well, my hope is your hope, and then that's what we see happening in the coming years. But the conversations are happening. The whole idea of a teacher shortage makes me both put my fist in the air and chuckle all at the same time. This isn't a teacher shortage. This is a teacher burnout.
Mm-hmm.
People are done. It's not sustainable. And I do want to encourage school administrators to notice that, right? Hold space for it, hold time for it, use faculty meetings to talk about it. Because if we don't, our kids are the ones who are ultimately
Mm-hmm.
paying for it, right?
Yes.
If we pretend that it doesn't exist, that only perpetuates the problem. We can name it and we can try to do our best in an individual space and place to tame it, but ultimately things are going to have to change. So, Meg, what do you want, educator? You are a real live educator in a real live school. What do you want other educators to know from you right now, especially all of the things that we've just spoken about? What do you want them to know?
I want them to know that I think I have to go. I think I have to go back with some of Dr. Perry's work and say that the number one indicator of resilience is a one caring relationship with an adult. I have to go back with that because that's the pill. I mean, that was the phrase that just changed the trajectory of how I practice and how I teach and how I parented my kids. Um, and it's okay. It's also okay to not be okay, and it's okay to take time. Um, it's okay to take care of yourself and to figure out whatever that means. It's also okay to take care of your colleagues, because you're going to need them. You do need them. And if you haven't built those relationships, that would be a good place to start. Would be with the person next door, or the person across the hall.
An unrelenting positive regard, you all. We have to have that in our schools from educator to educator. We had a mantra in my school, was pre-forgiven, right? If somebody snaps on me, you're pre-forgiven, right? We all deal with things. That is so powerful, Meg, because there are schools where teachers are operating in isolation, and I
Hmm.
cannot fathom what that must be and feel like. If we don't have each other's backs to say, hey, let me step in for a minute.
Hmm.
Hey, send them to me for a little bit. I'm regulated right now. Or, hey, I'm not in a good space. Do you mind stepping in? We have to have those conversations, because what I'm learning, even globally, is teachers are feeling backed in a corner with no
Hmm.
support and no way out. And you put any human being in that, there's only a couple responses that tend to
Hmm.
happen. Fight, flight, freeze are those primary responses.
And none of those should be a surprise when they happen.
None. So creating systems of support and definitely having each other's back is so very important. So, Meg, if people want to follow you, say, hey, can you come and talk to our school, or can you come and do the I always say it wrong.
Would you like me to help you?
Bal-A-Vis-X.
Yes, that's very close.
Close. That's close as I get. If they
Yeah.
want to say, hey, can you come do a session for our school? How they find you?
Sure, absolutely. You can find my website is heartlandbavx.com. You can find me there. There's a contact form there. You can find me on Facebook, and that is Heartland BAVX. You can find that webpage. Twitter, I am. Oh, that's a good question. I think it's MB Heartland BAVX on Twitter. You can get me there too. I'm happy to talk to folks. I'm also just happy to be a listening ear because yeah, I'm in the trenches every single day. And so if there are other educators that are in that same spot, band us together.
Well, and I want to publicly thank you because when I was planning some sessions, I emailed Meg and said, Meg, I need some like regulating activities that I can have adults do like in transitions because I want to make sure I'm using practices. She immediately was like, here you go. Here's all these great ideas. And I was like, wow. Right. So networks are important, which is why the Trauma Informed Educator Network exists, because that's what we do. I know that I have people send me things, say, will you look at this? That's what this work is about, you all. It's about providing support for each other, making sure we're learning from each other, and ultimately doing this so we can help and support our students to see their potential so clear that they even exceed their own expectations, right? It's not about saving our kids. It's not about fixing our kids. It really is about building them to see their own potential because they all have genius. Well, if you all want to follow me, if you don't already, if this is maybe your first time listening, I am Principalist on Instagram and Twitter. I always tell people Twitter, you'll get a lot of my thoughts. Instagram, you'll get a lot of my pictures, which is like anything from fishing to a quote. Who knows? Then on Facebook, you can follow me up on my name or the at TIE Network, which is the Trauma Informed Educators Network. I'm so excited to see it's almost 13,000 followers on the page. That's huge. And then, of course, we have the Trauma Informed Educators Network podcast group, which is now nearly 31,000 people of sharing, idea sharing. I need some support. People are jumping in and helping each other. It's pretty powerful stuff. And then, as always, please use the Disruptors Unite, because as you can see from my shirt, if you're here live, if not, I have it on. We are unapologetic disruptors for kids and ourselves at this point, to be quite honest. It's time to do things differently because what we've always done has not worked. So, Meg, thank you so much for your time. I told you that would fly by. Really appreciate you sharing your insights and expertise. For all the listeners that were here, thank you so much. I will be back next week. My guest next week is actually a friend of mine who was a parent at Fall Hamilton Elementary. Matter of fact, I just spoke to him tonight, and I said, I want you to come on the podcast. I want you to talk about what we talked about today, which was the struggle that he has experienced with schools and the perception of him as a father. And I think it's going to be a really powerful podcast. So I hope you join us next week. But thank you, and we will see you next week.